All right, welcome, William Stixrud and Ned Johnson. And I was just looking back at my old interviews, and I first interviewed the two of you for The Self-Driven Child in 2018.
Yeah.
I had a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old. And we were talking about, and I was struggling with things like, do I let my 5-year-old go to school in his bathrobe?
That's like a superhero costume. Come on.
Yeah. And then fast forward, the next interview we did is What Do You Say? And at that point in time, I had, I think, an 11-year-old and a 8-year-old.
Mm.
And that period of time, it was like, what TV shows, or can I let them watch video games, and what should I do, right? And now here we are, third book, the 7 principles for raising a self-driven child, and I have a 15-year-old that's backing my car out of my driveway. So
one of our favorite observations, playing on the title "The Self-Driven Child," of when any of us as a parent have children who are learning to drive, and we basically shift from 3 feet from our left to our right, but holy smokes, what a grander change in perspective.
Yeah, great. And how lucky am I that I've had the self-driven child principles throughout this whole process of being a parent. They have been so central to my parenting, and they're really central to how I communicate with my clients about parenting. And I will say I have 2 very self-driven children, and it hasn't been easy, but they're just doing it. They're doing all the things that you would hope they do, and they make the teenage years so much easier for me because I was doing it all along from 5 till now. So thank you, the 2 of you.
Well, you're welcome. I have to ask though, does your son wear his bathrobe while backing the car out?
No, different son. Okay. But the one that was wearing it at 5, first thing he does when he gets home from school is puts on his bathrobe.
Oh my gosh.
And makes himself a snack, right? So like he's just that kind of guy. He's already ready for being 21, really. He's prepared for college.
I love it.
Which is really what this book is about, is how do we help our kids have autonomy in the context of a very loving, supportive relationship with their parents, but them to chart their own path and create the life that they want to live. And you have, in this book, you're walking through it, you're doing the work, you're answering the questions. So we're going to go through it. But before we get started, Dr. Stixrud, can you tell us just a little bit about why this book now? What inspired the 2 of you to write it?
Well, in the introduction, we mentioned that we gave a lot of lectures in the Washington D.C. area where we live when the Self-Driven Child came out, and the mother of 3 or 4 kids that I tested and followed for years came to like four of our lectures. And I just noticed she was there. And at the 4th one, I went up to her and started talking to her. I said, "Why do you keep coming?" And she said that when I come and hear you guys talk, I feel so calm. I feel centered, and I feel okay about my kid, even though he's not doing great, but he's okay. He'll do okay. And then he'll screw something up, or I'll talk to a neighbor whose kid's doing much better than my kid. I get really anxious, and I want to come back and help me put things in perspective again. Mm-hmm. And as we say in the book, we're like her calm button, and that's basically what we're trying to do in this workbook, is because our major theme is that the most important things we can do for our kids are to help them feel that they're deeply and unconditionally loved. And as they get older, to develop a strong sense of control over their own lives. And giving them more control of their lives is hard as parents because we have to sit in our hands and zip our lips. And there's nothing more stressful, than trusting your kid to do something you've never seen him do before. You don't know if he can actually do it well. And I talked to a parent educator last week, who's on top of her 15-year-old son because he's not doing that well in school. He's not turning it in. He's lying. And she just has to learn to change the energy, but it's hard. So the workbook is to try to make it easier. There's scenarios, there's exercises to figure out what are my values? What do I really want from my kid? And why is this hard for me? How that's different from that I was raised, but is it right? To help people figure out that it's right and that it's safe to trust your kids more and worry about them less.
Well, you have these 7 steps, and the first step is about putting connection first, which is what you're alluding to. And really, you're encouraging parents to explore for themselves, like what makes a strong connection. You have these journal questions where you start with the parent asking themselves. You write, when you think of other people in your life who you're not able to be close with, what's preventing you from having a strong connection, right? And then you can flip that, right? What's preventing my child from having a strong connection with me? So why is this foundation of, my listeners all know this. So we all know it. We know relationships are important. It's really hard in that moment as a parent to prioritize that because we think getting our kid out the door or preventing him from backing into the tree is really what's important, right? But why does this relationship come first?
Oh, there are a bunch of reasons. I mean, to begin with, the strength of a connection that a child or a young person has with an adult or another caregiver, a parent or another caregiver, is the single strongest protective factor against stress on developing young brains. And if we really think of ourselves in the business of helping our young people develop the brains they'll carry into adulthood, we kind of want to take that seriously. That a child is better off growing up with a loving parent in a war zone than growing up in a lovely neighborhood warring with their parents. It's just so injurious to relationships and to healthy brains when we don't have a close connection. I mean, you take the most extreme examples, the children remaining in orphanages who if they never had a secure attachment at the beginning, that they're really toast throughout their lives. Most of us are not going to have children who ever experience that, but it certainly is in the case where your kid's about to crash the car or did crash the car, crash the grades or crashed whatever, that we get stressed just the way that Bill described. But when we don't prioritize connection, we prioritize correcting, then children tend not to feel safe bringing problems to us, and we kind of can't help them solve problems we don't know about. And when we can prioritize the connection and lower their stress, kids are better placed in a brain state where they're able to oftentimes solve those problems for themselves. And that's where we really would like to get out of the problem solving, the job as being parent as a problem solver, to one who facilitates our kids developing within themselves the ability to soothe themselves, to solve problems, to straighten out situations. And it's just not intuitive to any of us that when our kids are struggling, with the most helpful things we can do is prioritize that connection and not jump in to start fixing or correcting, as a first step.
Mm-hmm. Just that simple task of checking yourself. How many times a day are you interacting with your child for connection, fun, versus fixing and problem solving?
Yeah.
And if that ratio is off, your kids will brace themselves when you can see it when you walk into the room. They know that you're coming in not for fun or connection.
Have you
coming
read
in
Michael
to fix them or potentially solve a problem for them, which then they can just be total lax and let you do it because that whole energy
Have you read
exchange.
Michaeline DeCleff's Hunt Gather Parent?
No.
So she's an NPR science correspondent, and she had followed a bunch of primitive cultures, of Inuit culture and Amazonian, so on and so forth. But when she looked at these cultures, she found that the typical adult would offer instructions to a child 3, 4, maybe 5 times an hour. When she followed families in San Francisco where she resided at the time, it was like 70 times an hour. And so she resolved, I will not give her, in this case, her daughter Rosie, who's about 5. I won't give her more than 5 instructions, in an hour, because I want to prioritize my connection. And she said, so she started this at 2:00. And by 2:06, she's like, oh gosh, right. She'd already hit 5, right?
Yeah.
And you think, what does it feel like to be, no, watch what you're doing, just all the time. It's not, nobody wants to be told what to do all the time.
And I'm also thinking that in our second book, What Do You Say? we talk about this research that shows that negative words and interactions have a much stronger impact on us and on our kids than positive ones. And we go with kind of John Gottman's recommendation regarding relationships in general, is we want to try to have 5 positive interactions with our kids for every negative one, because the negative ones are more powerful. And so our motto is to seek first to understand. When kids are screwing up, first thing I try to do is check our, as much as we can, and take a break if we need to, but check our own anger and judgment, and try to find, well, tell me what's going on. How did this happen in a non-judgmental way, which brings closeness. And as you're saying, Ned and Diana, this allows kids to solve their own problems.
Yeah.
Give them space to solve their own problems.
The other day we were watching a basketball March Madness with our kids. And we were calling my son in to come in and watch, there was like a play that was happening that would be really great. And we couldn't find him anywhere. The kid had gotten on his bike and left and biked to the gym and was working out. And we finally got a hold of him, and he was just on his way back. And there was a part of me that just wanted to scream at him, right? But this is the self-driven child gone wrong, or gone right. I don't know. I mean, he's going to the gym. He's figured out how to get there. It's a couple miles away. All these things. But my instinct was not to praise and then have some conversations about, we were wondering where you were.
It would help us if you
help us understand where you're going before you leave.
Yeah.
My instinct was just to yell at him because I was scared.
Yeah.
So sometimes that writing reflex, the motivational interviewing, actually interviewed Stefan Rolnick, and he talked about the writing reflex with his own son putting on his shoes in the morning. And I was like, this is so great. Motivational interviewing guy struggles with this too. But the writing reflex comes from our own emotional avoidance. It comes from, as parents, it's really uncomfortable to sit with not fixing it. And then we have to change our own minds to look for the positive and enter into that relationship, which really is part of this second part, which is to be a consultant, not a manager.
Yeah.
And the second step around that, which for me is that was the foundational skill that I learned back when my children were, a number of years ago in 2018 from you. That has been the thread that's been the most important thread for me. I mean, I get the relationship part when the therapist, but the consultant part's been a little harder.
Well, Ned and I had an article in the New York Times, I think in 2019, because it came out around Thanksgiving, because by November 1st, between the two of us, we knew 7 kids who had started college and were already home. And 201, I mean, we knew these kids, and they just didn't have there wasn't any evidence that they were ready to go to college. They could actually manage their own life. And we think kind of in terms of reverse engineering, the goal is for kids to be able to manage their own life, to run their own life successfully before they leave home, so they don't run it into the ground. And our job is to help kids, in our opinion, is to help kids figure out who they want to be and what kind of life they want and how to create it. And we don't know. One of the coolest things that anybody ever said to me was maybe 25 years ago. Some father said, "One of the things I love about raising adolescents is every day when they come home from school, you get to see who they're deciding to be." And I just love that perspective. We're trying to help them figure out, who do you want to be? How can I help you? And we can set limits. We have guidelines. We can work out understanding with kids. But the goal, from our point of view, is not that kids always do well. The goal is that they learn that this is my life, that I'm going to get out of it what I put into it. We support them to work hard to develop themselves.
You have these skills. It's a table that you get to work through about skills that a competent young adult needs. And they're in these categories. So health and hygiene, things like clipping your nails. I wanted to add to it, how to deal with something like having your period on a camping trip. Right? These are like life skills.
We didn't think of that one, Diane.
I know. You need a consultant.
We should have consulted with some double X chromosomes.
Transportation, work, post-secondary education, financial stuff, and then the specifics under each one of those. And we don't always think about this until the kid is about to leave for college or the kid is coming back from college. It's a great checklist. And you could even sit down with your kid around it. Like, which ones of these do you know? Which ones do you not know? And then how can we start shifting some of that energy to them to take more responsibility? So one of the things that I think people are afraid of with becoming a consultant is that their child is just going to like hang out on the couch all day and do nothing because it's all, they're self-driven. That's what they want to do. It's just play video games. So how do you respond to parents that are concerned about that?
One part of that exercise was to on that list of tasks, a list of skills, is also to reflect at what age did you learn or develop this skill and from whom? Because there's a real concern that if we haven't stuffed all these things into their heads, by age 18, that they're toast, right? But of course, the reality is we learn things from roommates and professors and our resident advisor, and our employers, our boyfriend, girlfriend, all kinds of people. And so if we feel that it must be learned and it must be learned now, of course it's crazy making. And the more we then try to force it on kids, the more they naturally resist it. It doesn't mean that we, abet them. I'm not going to be my kid's, maid and room service. Can I bring you something while you sit here and play Xbox for the 1700th hour? We're not talking about that. But a lot of the urgency that we feel is really born out of an inaccurate model of how we ourselves acquired these things. I mean, for goodness sakes, there's also this thing called TikTok. You might have heard about it. It's very trendy, right? My kid learned to cook by some TikTok trend, and he's sitting over there watching the video over and over. I'm like, well, that's awesome,
Yeah, and certainly our premise is that you can't make kids want what they don't want, and you can't make them do anything really against their will. You can't force them, and also the kids want their life to work. I mean, nobody really wants to be a slacker in their life. I mean, our experience is that kids want to do well, and they do well when they can. And so I think that if certainly kids are spending too much time on the couch or and playing video games, we have meetings with them. We do collaborative problem solving to kind of this isn't working for me. It makes me too nervous. You spend this amount of time, so we negotiate something. But I think that I've been thinking like this and recommending this stuff for 40 years. I've never seen it go wrong. Just not too long ago, one of a woman who has 4 kids, and I did neuropsychological testing on her 4 kids, and Ned did test prep with her 4 kids. And she's the most organized, on top of things person I've ever met. She's incredibly competent, but she's very micromanaging, and it wasn't working with her youngest son. He was really screwing up at age 15. And she loves Ned and me, and she trusted us enough to read The Self-Driven Child and just bit the bullet and backed off, trusted the kid, supported him where he wanted support. And we got these letters from his teachers when he's a senior in high school, 3 years later, and they're just incredible about what an incredible person he'd become. And I'm just saying it works. It's hard, but it works.
So it works, and this is part of the adjustment of the goal of the parents, because what is the success, I guess? Because you're talking about these teachers saying what an incredible person he's become. And I sent out this question this morning. I have this group of women that I meet with on a regular basis. And we've been, we talk about our kids and successes and struggles and all that. And they're pretty psychologically sophisticated women. And so I sent them, like, what do you want to ask these guys? Like, what do you want to know? And a number of them said, we have been doing sort of this self-driven approach, and our kids love hanging out with us. They're super chill, and they aren't super motivated to move out. And and then one of them said, I kind of wonder if I should have been more of a tiger mom, because this like ambitious striving thing, we were so anti the ambitious striving. They were rebellious parents. They were going, zigging when everyone was zagging. And these kids are leading rock climbing trips, and they're, surfing, and they're working at Trader Joe's. I mean, they're doing all these great things, right? Right on track.
Yeah. When I talk to kids who are not working hard in school, the first question I ask them is there something you work hard at, you care about to get better and better and better? Mm-hmm. Video games accepting. And if it's virtually anything, if it's, I really love I have a part-time job, I'm really responsible, I really work hard, I'm really getting good at it, I don't worry about you, because I know that you're sculpting a brain, you're wiring a brain that knows how to be really focused, lots of effort, lots of determination, lots of energy, and low stress. And that's what I assume that at some point that school is going to become more important to you than it is now, be a higher priority, or you're building a career. Mm-hmm. But I'm not worried about you. And when I tell that to kids, it motivates them. It motivates them to work hard in school. But the message is that the most important thing is you're developing a brain. That when something becomes important to you, you can really go for it.
Right. Which is connected to this third one, which is about communicating healthy expectations, right? You say excessive pressure to excel is now believed to be the fourth leading cause of adolescent unwellness behind only poverty, trauma, and discrimination.
Yeah.
And these healthy expectations, the balance between developing an excellent seeker versus a perfectionist, right? And that it's not that we're saying we don't want you to seek excellence, or Seligman's PERMA model, which has achievement in it. Like achievement is built into positive psychology,
Yeah.
but it's a different, the reason behind that achievement is that there's a human yearning to develop competence and grow and get stronger at things. And we want to ignite that yearning in our kids, as opposed to just the yearning to be perfect or to get to the top, which can make us very stressed.
Yeah. And I'll talk about sort of underperformers first, and then Bill jump in with perfectionists. One of the challenges I think we often, toxic expectations are really, rather healthy ones are confidence that if this is something that matters to you, when it matters to you, or if you really want to put your mind to it, I'm confident that you can do well and achieve a level that's meaningful to you. Toxic ones are, I'm going to withhold my approval from you unless you meet this level or struggle or suffer enough that I think you've given your absolute best, whatever that actually means. And it just means that my approval, my love for you is contingent upon something where I get to say. And the challenge with that, of course, is that we think that we're setting this expectation that this is what's going to make kids work harder and finally step up. But it's a fear-based model, and it doesn't work very well because you have to keep upping the model. We also know that the major manifestation of anxiety is avoidance. So when kids feel like they have to, but they may feel like they can't, sometimes they just peace out altogether. And also, my daughter who struggled, it was a long story, but probably talked about this in our first call, where she was full school refusal for all of 8th grade and was anxious and she was depressed. Finally, at age 19, a diagnosis of autism, which explained a lot. But the therapist with whom she was working in high school, she said, it will be interesting to see what Katie Johnson does with that remarkable mind of hers when she figures out what it is she wants to do. And so she started college. Her first semester of college, she got more A's than I probably got in 4 years of college. And the end of the first semester said, I know my tuition only pays for this number of credits, but I really want to take this class as well. Would you and Mom be willing to pay for me to take another class? And I mean, I just fell out of my chair. And this is a kid who I'm not going to say she missed more school than she attended school, but it wasn't far off from that. Just high school was a disaster. But we never said, you gotta, because for her, getting out the door most days was kind of an achievement. And so we knew that potential was always there. And we would talk about the strength we saw in her, but there was nothing was contingent on you were doing this amount of work or getting this grade. And when she got to college and, as Bill pointed, figured out what mattered to her, she just went from 0 to 60 in 6 weeks. It was just stunning to watch. And I think that was always born of, as Bill said, she wants her life to work because it's her darn life. And consistently, we kept saying, we know we can see these skills in you. We know you have these abilities.
Yeah.
And we're willing to wait.
Yeah. When we started researching this expectations, because we know that parental expectations are really powerful. And we were really surprised to read that the guy who's done the most research in this area says, as Ned said, that the best kinds of, the most effective expectations are conveyed through, I believe in you, through, I have confidence in you. You can figure this out, as opposed to you must. I was really struck by that. And as a neuropsychologist, I write reports on children and teenagers. And in my conclusion, almost everybody I see, I'm able to express confidence in them, that I'm optimistic about this. And some of my clients years later say that how much it helped them, that knowing that after I did a comprehensive evaluation, I had confidence that they could figure it out, even though they were screwing up. They weren't doing well when I saw them. So it's a powerful message. And I think Ned and I both work with a lot of perfectionists. And it's certainly, it's a hard way to be wiring. And so we did some research on this topic as we were writing this chapter on expectations. And discovered this research on what you mentioned, Diana, which is this the difference between excellent seekers and perfectionists, where excellent seekers are people who really are motivated to do a good job. And if they screw something up, they want to learn from it, as opposed to perfectionists, where I don't want to make a mistake. If I make a mistake, I don't want anybody to know. I don't want to know. And how more adaptive that excellent seeker is than a perfectionist. I mean, it's a more adaptive way to be wired. And I think that my sense is that we can help young people, change that wiring more by saying, consider the possibility of seeing yourself more as an excellent seeker. I don't want you to be a slacker. I love the fact that I love how hard you work. I love how determined you are to do well. But you could be an excellent seeker and not be a perfectionist. It just means changing your relationship with mistakes and changing your way you talk to yourself. So if you screw something up, or you get a 95, or you're the third best in your class, you aren't a loser. So I haven't done therapy for many years, but I do work with a lot of perfectionists, and I do. And my experience is that this idea of just shifting a little bit from a perfectionist to an excellent seeker really helps.
And part of that for us as parents is paying attention to what we're praising. Are we praising perfection versus are we praising excellence seeking? And one of my favorite forms of praise that I do with my husband quite a bit is we'll be washing dishes in the kitchen and the kids will be sort of in the other room. That's when we praise our kids.
Yep.
We do this intentional praising. We start talking about them. Oh my gosh, did you see him putting the legs on that IKEA furniture today? He just like kept at it and it was so frustrating and I was losing my marbles and he was still there doing it. And like this kind of like intentional parental praise that they're listening in on, like that's the best.
Yeah.
The top of the staircase talks, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know, maybe I learned that from you. I probably did. You probably suggested it at some point, but that's been a thing that we've continued throughout, of really paying attention to what are you verbalizing praise around, but then also what are you telling stories about when you retell stories about your kids and their successes? Are you telling these sort of growth mindset stories about them as kids? You know, the one with the bathrobe, who he was by the time he's still into the bathrobe. This poor kid.
I still want a picture of this.
A glue gun. Because he wanted to listen to stories while he was walking around the house, like had to clean his room and things like that. So he got out a glue gun and he made a little pouch for the back of the bathrobe to put his iPad in so that he could listen to stories while he was cleaning his room. I mean, these are sophisticated, excellent seekers, right? So I do think we have to think behaviorally as parents as well. What are we shaping? What are we reinforcing? And being intentional with that, and not just falling into the trap of always praising perfectionism. And that's everything from how your kid is unloading the dishwasher. Are you pointing out how they did it wrong, or are you praising the process, right? It kind of goes back to number one.
Excellent point.
Okay, so we've talked about, I'm just kind of orienting people to the book, because the way that it's set up is you go through these principles: put connection first, be a consultant, not a boss or manager, communicate healthy expectations. Principle number 4, teach your kids an accurate model of reality. What does that mean?
Well, there's a story in one of our books about a time where I was in Houston talking about self-driven child. And I met I talked to parents in the evening and educators in the morning. And at lunchtime, I had dinner with student government kids in this high school. And at one point, I asked them, "How many of you want to be happy as an adults?" And they all kind of raised they raised their hand. And I said, "What do you understand it takes to be happy as an adult?" And this one kid said, "I think I speak for all of us, that we think that if we get into a good enough college, everything is set." And I was so struck by how delusional their thinking was about what creates happiness in adult life, and certainly. All the high achieving kids that we see now, not all, but the majority, the vast majority, think the most important outcome of their whole adolescence and childhood is where they go to college. Many of them have my grades will follow me the rest of my life. My grades are the most important thing. And it just doesn't have any relationship with reality, in the sense that we want kids to understand that the path to being successful, having a successful and a fulfilling life, isn't necessarily all filled with successes, and that the top students aren't necessarily more happy and fulfilled and successful than lesser students. And I think that there's so many myths about what it takes to be successful that kids grow up believing that we think our effort should be spent on helping them ground them more in the reality that how many people who were not good students and become incredibly successful. How many wonderful people are there who who contribute tremendously to the world, who screwed up a lot before they kind of found their way, or were very late bloomers. Ned, when you jump in?
Oh, I'm just the start of the book talks about the Marvel origin story. That Bill flunked out of graduate school, got fired from his first job, but is flourishing from my perspective more than any human being I know on this planet. And a story that I may have shared when we were first back, I spent 3 months of seventh grade in a pediatric psychiatric hospital. My parents were a bunch of stuff going on. It was just all hard. But the idea that our paths are linear, right? There's this very narrow path to success that's all about academic achievement and highly selective, well, highly rejective universities that lead to, the job in finance and blah, blah, blah. Those are the people who are happiest in the world. I mean, two things. One, if that were the case, then you wouldn't probably have 60% of kids at places like Yale be anxious and depressed because they've achieved everything, right? And this idea that it's such a narrow path leads kids and their loving parents to very narrow thinking about of the things we need to sacrifice in order to stay on this very narrow path to get them to be successful, so they'll be happy, whether I make them crazy or not. And there's a story in the book. I was working with this family who announced to me his daughter had just finished her sophomore year of high school, how they were intending for her to go to this Ivy League school. I won't name which one. And they'd already made a sizable 7-figure contribution to this university. That's in the millions in case you're doing the math really fast, folks. And the plan was all there. She just needed the scores. Okay. All right. Fine.
No pressure there, buddy.
No pressure there. And then this quick aside, but all she wants to do is play soccer and hang out with her friends. I mean, like, what's the point? It's not like she's going to be a recruited athlete. And I'm not the psychologist that you guys are, but I'm thinking, maybe those are the only two parts of her life that are keeping her sane.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And of course, that we think about academic achievement as being all the great things in life lead from that. But so many of the ways that people develop themselves are people who become really good therapists or really good salespeople or really good HR people or really good CEOs tend to spend more of their time focusing on people than they do focusing on things, right? Because those are the skills that you develop, as an effective leader. And so we just want parents to recognize, even for their own lives, the ways that the paths they've taken to success, and to try to talk back against all the myths that just are out there, and we unintentionally reinforce for our children. Because among other things, the Sonia Lupin, she of the nuts, if you remember this from The Self-Driven Child, of novelty, unpredictability, perceived threat, and a low sense of control, she said the single most effective cognitive reframing to lower stress is plan B thinking. And most of us have lived lives where it wasn't plan A, plan A, plan A. It was we fell off the path, we found plan B, we pivoted in the Silicon Valley, parlance. And that for us is part of the accurate model we want to give to all kids, so that they aren't driven by fear. They're working hard, as Bill said, to develop themselves. But they know if this doesn't work out, there's something else. If that doesn't work out, there's something else, because there's always a something else.
So an accurate model of reality, teaching our kids an accurate model of reality. You talk about happiness in there. And when I think about my kids and happiness, that's actually not always my goal. I love the work of Oishi and Westgate, and they talk about a well-lived life and this research on a well-lived life of yes, happiness is one thing, pleasure and meaning are both important, but they also talk about psychological richness. And so much of those twists and turns of life, someone who's dropped, I always tell my kids, I've dropped out of every school that I've post-elementary school. I had to withdraw from every school that I attended when I was in school for a long time. I got my PhD. So that developed a lot of psychological richness. Psychological richness comes from studying abroad. Psychological richness comes from withdrawing from a school because it's not right for you, and then finding another path and taking that gap year and working here and doing that. And the capacity to design your own life, and no
Mm-hmm.
one's life is straight, is a rich life. It's a much richer life than I knew what I was going to be when I was 4. And I stayed on that train track until I'm 54. And I'm like, what am I doing with my life?
Completely. And certainly when we talk about happiness, and we do in our last 2 books, we talk about the difference between happiness and pleasure. And we are talking about, kind of giggling kind of happiness.
Mm-hmm.
But we're talking about that well-being, that sense of fulfillment or meaning that you're talking about. And it takes time. And part of the reason that I feel so strongly about this area is that because I've done this work so long, for 40 years, I've seen kids, just at least 1,000 kids, I'm sure, who were completely a disaster at one point in their development, who turned out incredible. I just talked not too long ago with a guy who I tested him the first time when he was 11, saw him again when he was 17, and he was in a therapeutic boarding school all 4 years of high school, and he was 17, almost 18 when I saw him as a senior. He said, in 2 months, I turned 18, and I can leave this place, and I can smoke pot all day. I was not particularly optimistic he's going to turn things around soon. He just started his own practice in Seattle, Washington, as a neuropsychologist. Mm-hmm. And I just know there's thousands of these kind of things. So I just know that the process isn't always easy. And so many people where it was just a straight kind of vertical climb aren't happy with their lives. It takes time to figure this out. It takes relationships. It takes setbacks to figure out who you want to be and what's important to you. And also to develop that confidence that I can handle setbacks.
And I think about, can one think of any movie, any Pixar movie or Marvel movie or whatever, where the heroine or hero doesn't face some big setback, some big defeat midway through? I mean, it just doesn't happen. And to your point, Dan, of the psychological richness, I'm really not sure whether it was a good thing or a bad thing that I was in a psychiatric hospital for 3 months in 7th grade. Mm-hmm. My probably like you, my true north is, how can I help? And my second is, can I get paid for that? Because that would be cool too. And my 23-year-old who just graduated college, he's home now before he heads off to graduate school in the fall. He said, Dad, I've been thinking about love languages. First of all, I'm impressed by any 20-year-old boy who knows what love languages are. And he says, it seems to me that your love languages is helping. And I just looked at him like, tell me more. I mean, and so for all the words that I've rained down on both of my poor unsuspecting children, the fact that he's actually, because that's not something I've talked about, but it's something that he's watched. I'm like, yeah.
That's pretty cool.
He's pretty cool. Yeah. He's a neat kid.
So we want our kids to be self-driven. We want to, be emotionally connected to them. We want them to chart their own path. And part of charting their own path is sitting on your hands. William Stixrud, you taught me that. Sit on your hands sometimes and let them figure this out, not pushing for them to change and helping them find their own inner motivation to change. So principle number 5, motivate your kids without trying to change them. And I have an example of this that maybe you can help me with. It's spring. We're looking at summer. I have a 15-year-old. It's about time to maybe start to think about internship / job. Like he's in that kind of range where he can't really get a job yet, but he can't really, sorry, you're not in camp anymore. So we're figuring this out. And we were in a surf shop. We were getting a surfboard. And the guy at the surf shop said, "Oh, you should come be an assistant counselor for our surf school," which is like the raddest summer thing you could ever do. And mom is like, "That's the raddest summer thing. Come here, hey, we had to get the resume. Let's call you back." I was like wheeling and dealing. Like all of a sudden, I was his agent to try and get him this position. And I noticed that the more and more and more excited that I got about this, the more and more and more he backed off. And then he got into like analysis paralysis about the resume that I'm building up, that he needs to have this perfect CV. So help us out here. We really know something so good for our kids. It's perfect for him. But the more that we push, the less they get involved.
And we don't really know. That's the thing, because ultimately they don't know. They don't necessarily know either. That's the thing.
Yeah.
They get to figure it out and they get to learn from it. I just, at least at my age, I'm very humble about my ability to know what's right for anybody else, really. Because as Ned said, I mean, that would we have, if we could choose, would we have Ned not been in a pediatric psychiatric hospital for 3 months and said, yeah, we would have chose a different path for him. But he's one of the most incredible people I've ever met, and I wouldn't change anything about it. And I think that for most of us who've had setbacks, things have been very embarrassing or it took us a long time to figure out. It's not like other people can tell us, "I know what's right for you."
Hmm.
I was in a PhD program in English literature, unfortunately, and I didn't last long. But it's because people said, "You're good at this. I think this would be right for you," and it turned out that it wasn't. It turned out that it wasn't right for me.
Thank goodness.
Well, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Okay, so this is a really good correction. I
Well,
don't know that that's the right summer thing for him to do. That's like the
Yeah.
first step. Check
Yeah.
yourself.
well,
Yeah,
yeah,
check yourself.
and just,
Wow. Okay.
and I think that certainly I don't want kids when they're in high school spending all summer just fooling around. I mean, I love them. I think that working is really good for kids, and having internships is really good for kids. Um, but I think that I mean, certainly at age 30, if you said, well, my life would have gone better if my mother hadn't been so excited about that that serve job. That it's just absurd. It's just not that big a deal.
Yeah.
Um, and we respectfully, just support him in doing it.
So
Uh,
coach me a little bit. What would be the conversation to have there?
right now at this point,
Yeah, if you're
I mean,
talking or for anybody that maybe they're wanting to have a conversation with their kid about something they I mean, here's the bigger picture. Your kid seems like they're blocked around doing
yeah,
something. You can't get them to do it. And you want to have a different type of conversation around it than you should do it, or have you done the resume yet, or have you done the college application, or have you cleaned your room, whatever that is, whatever the block is.
with things like this, I mean, we want to remember that our goal is not to motivate our kids. It's not to give them the reason why they do the thing, but help them to find within themselves the reason to do the thing. And if there isn't a reason within them to work at a surf shop, well good luck with that, right? But you noted at the beginning the ambivalence, right? That there are reasons why he might want to do this. There may be reasons why he doesn't want to do this. There may be reasons why he wants to do something else instead. Most decisions are really complex, right? Because it's trading this job versus all other possibilities, or hanging out with his lovely mom on the couch, right, and playing Xbox. I mean, there are a lot of different ways. And the challenge is, if he's ambivalent about this, he can see why it would be the raddest summer thing ever, right? But he actually knows someone who works there that I told you about, and that guy's kind of a doofus. And he doesn't really want to hang out with him, right? Or he worries that he'd rather be making money. I'm just making up reasons. Then when we argue one side of it, he's likely, at least even in his own head, to argue the other side of it. So the exercise that's in this book is to think about a summer internship, or kids engaging in school more or whatever, and try to grab a piece of paper, use the workbook, write down all the reasons you imagine your son already knows for why it'd be really good to have that internship. It'd look good for college. My mom would be happy. I'll get, a discount on a surfboard, whatever, a bunch of reasons. But then sit down and write on the flip side all the feelings why he might not want to do it, right? It's too early in the morning, right? He worries he'll get stuck in that, because his mom told him to. I mean, they're feelings, right? And when we can see both sides of that equation, it's easier for us to step back and stop trying to pound on the reasons why, to say, so if you did do this, and it's sort of Bill Stixrudism, take force off the table. If you did take this internship, what would be some of the reasons why you'd want to submit that application? If you did get this internship, what are some of the good things you hope would come out of it? If you did take this, what do you worry might happen and make it not be so successful? And then you get to start having this, to your words, much more psychologically rich conversation about reasons for and against. And you're not putting your thumb on the scale one way or the other. Because what you're trying to do, we're all trying to do, is to help young people, and ourselves for that matter, articulate for ourselves the reasons to do something that might be in our own best interest. But if you feel like, or he feels like you're pushing too hard on something, even though it's a really good reason, it effectively becomes tainted, right? And he doesn't want, I can't use that as a reason because it was shoved down my throat.
Right. Well, I used to be a clinical director of a treatment center for eating disorders, and one guarantee to get somebody more stuck in the eating disorder is to tell them all the reasons why they need to eat.
Wow.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
guaranteed you're going to get
Yep.
that person.
And
totally
they've never
convinced
thought
by
of
the
those reasons.
body.
I'm sure, and they've never thought of those reasons themselves, right?
Exactly. No one's ever told them that before. They
It
haven't,
occurred to them. Yeah.
yeah. But really, the way that the way I'd win them over every time is like, tell me why you love your eating disorder so much. Like, what's so great about it?
Well,
the thing that their parent would be so afraid to tell, to ask them.
right.
I love
Well,
it.
I think all three of us are fans of motivational interviewing. This approach to just asking these open-ended questions to try to understand and reflect back. I'm trying to understand what you're saying, and then ideally, they voice their own reason for change. And I think neither Ned and I are formally trained in motivational interviewing, but it's not it's a sophisticated process, but it's not real complicated. And I've had parents use it with great success. And we talk about it. What do you say? This one kid I tested in the summer during the pandemic, and he was 15 years old, starting 10th grade, and he wanted to make the varsity basketball team. He's a really good basketball player, but he's smoking pot a lot in the summer, and the family found his stash a couple of times and got rid of it, and he kept replacing it. And I sent the mother a copy of the chapter that we were working on motivating kids without changing them. And the mom read the chapter, and she sat down and said, "Tell me what you love about pot." The same thing you suggested that you did with eating disorder. Tell me what you get out of it. And the kid waxed rhapsodic about how relaxed he is and how he doesn't worry about so much stuff. He's more fun to be with. And then at one point he said, "But the problem is that I can't push myself enough in basketball to make the varsity. I'm worried that I'm not going to make the varsity." And she said, "Is that something you'd like to, any ideas about how to change that or what you might do?" And within a month, he'd stopped smoking pot. And I think that it's counterintuitive to think that starting to seek first to understand what your sense of this, as opposed to lecturing or judging. It's just so powerful.
Well,
You know,
most behaviors have some degree of ambivalence. And what you're doing there is you're letting the ambivalence in your child have a voice. You're giving enough space for them to get to that place. And then when you hear it, you kind of massage it. You support the change talk. But one thing I want to add about motivational interviewing, because sometimes we get so focused on that part of it. And I think especially with children, when I'm thinking about my kid in the surf shop, the other aspect of it is, do they have the skills necessary to make the change? And it's not just motivation. Motivational interviewing has both. It's like, how important is it to you to make this change? Yeah. And do you have the skills necessary? Do you need some scaffolding from your parents? And there's a difference between scaffolding from parents versus I'm stealing it from you. Like it may be that the black lock to some kid is that they don't know how to write a resume. No one's shown them this. This is like everything they're doing is new.
Well,
them,
and
right?
it's such a great point.
And that's how to drive a car, right?
And that's where it circles back to the consulting, right? Is there a way that I can help, right? Or if you can, you can watch your kid go, that'd be fun. And then you can see his, like a shadow come across his face and say, what's in your head right now? It looks like you're excited, but now it looks like you've got, kind of concern. Can you tell me what are some of the concerns that you have, right? And then, I don't know how to write a resume. I don't know how to surf. I don't know how to do whatever. Is that something you like help with? Is that something you like to do better? And so I think a lot of times when people read The Self-Driven Child, they can mistake it to mean that we're thinking like, total laissez-faire. You just let your kid, good luck with all that kind of thing. And it's 100% not that. It's offering kids, particularly kids who need tons of scaffolding, all the support that they want. Right? Not all the support that we think they need. Right? We're not trying to because you don't force help on people that they don't want. But you offer all the help that you think that they need and ask them if it's something that they want.
Yeah, I said to my son, I tell them, use me up. 3 more years with me.
That's great.
Use
love
me
it.
up all you want. It's available. I'm here. My boys are both interested in girls. So I'll say like, like I know a lot about girls. I am one. Use me up. Ask me all the questions. Do you think a girl with all the things.
Yeah.
And I'm not pushing. Okay. So we have 2 more principles. I want to make sure we just tap on both of them so people get a sense of what they're going to get in this book. And in the book, you go through each principle. You have assignments for the parent to do writing, but you also provide education. So it's like this combination, this beautiful combination of the two. Probably the most important principle underlying all of this, well, connection is one of them, but is to be a non-anxious presence in your family. And I want to bring this up in the context of sometimes really hard things happen to families. Someone gets sick. We're going to get a divorce. We need to move. A parent lost their job, right? Like these big things that are really hard for the parent to navigate, and they have to have conversations with their kids about the hardships of life. Can we talk about the presence of the parent and the non-anxious presence and why that is so important and how you cultivate that?
So we didn't make this term up. Edwin Friedman, who was a social worker and a rabbi, family therapist, who studied systems from families to corporations. And he concluded that systems work best if the people in charge are not overly anxious and emotionally reactive. And we just reasoned that as parents, it's so much easier to deal with kids and to help kids from the time they're infants to the time they leave home. Actually, as adults, I have adult children, of course, and it's much easier if we stay calm. And it's there are people who are not wired that way to necessarily be laid back people, but who can move in the direction of being a non-anxious presence. It doesn't mean that you're never anxious, you're never nervous, you never talk about how to stop. What it means is that we want to communicate as much as we can courage as opposed to fear, and confidence that the people can handle stuff. And we want to work on and we talk about kind of emergency medicine regarding when we are anxious, how we deal with it, and also more preventative practice. That kind of, you talked about contemplative practices before we got on the show, and we're big fans of meditation and practices that can help people calm down their stress response and be less emotionally reactive and move in that direction of being a non-anxious presence in their family.
One thing that keeps running through my head is when my kids were little kids. I mean, we go to the ER for the split lip or need to get a nebulizer, and my kid had a brain tumor. That was more of an adventure. And for any parent who shows up with a kid in an ER or your spouse or somebody, it's one of the worst days of your life, right? And one of their young life. But for the people who work there, it's just Tuesday, right? And it's another day of work in that problem. And I think the reality is probably for most people who are parents, they've already faced hard things. I mean, there are very few people get to be my age who haven't had, something really pretty challenging going on. But most of us learned from that, got through it. Most of us have post-traumatic growth. And so one of the things is, just as Bill was saying, that we can face hard things with courage. We're not looking forward to it, but would say, I've confidence this is going to work out well enough. And certainly with my daughter, when she was really struggling, I would say I never said I know. I never, ever say I know because, the universe has a way of humbling people who say I know. But I could certainly say, I'm confident this is going to work out, well enough, in part because young people and all of us want things to work out well enough. And if we go back to the point we made earlier, when in the presence of someone who's stressed, if you are less stressed, you kind of become a stress sponge, and pulling stress out of their nervous system allow those executive functions to come back online, which helps people solve for themselves, even if it's just putting things into perspective, solve things for themselves simply because you're there and you're making space and you're hanging with them when things are hard.
Yeah. One of my favorite poets is John O'Donohue, and he has this poem that I'll often read at the beginning of when I lead a workshop or retreat. And it says, stay clear of those vexed in spirit, learn to linger around someone of ease, who feels they have all the time in the world, and gradually you will return to yourself. having learned a new respect for your heart and the joy that dwells far within slow time. And I think there's something about the non-anxious presence of the parent you're giving. There's just a lot of time for you and that ease, even in this, especially in those moments that are the most stressful moments, like at the airport when you're trying to make the flight, or, when you're, going to see grandpa in the hospital. If you have that non-anxious presence, you're teaching their nervous system how to be, um, coming from this place of like a more sort of wise space. And it links to our last principle, which we'll just tap on because we're pretty much out of time, which is the last principle, which is encourage radical downtime.
Yeah.
Radical downtime. Yeah.
So the basic idea of this is that I read a book in 1881. I didn't read it in 1881. This is written in 1881. It's called "The Causes of Increased Nervousness in Americans," and it was written by a physician in 1881. And the hypothesized causes were the railroad, the Western Union, the pocket watch, things that made the pace of life go faster and made us more attentive to the small units of time. And you think about that on steroids now, and just how fast-paced life is. And the idea is that it used to be, 60, 70 years ago, maybe 100 years ago, but that gardening or playing bridge could be a perfectly great pastime to kind of to restore your well-being. And right now we're arguing we need more radical downtime. And certainly young people, the three forms of radical downtime that we talk about in our books are meditation, sleep, and just periods of mind wandering or daydreaming. And it gets harder and harder for people to have this experience of radical downtime. We're sleeping less than we used to. Many people, I've been practicing meditation for 51 years, initially 40 minutes a day, and now about 2 hours a day. And it's far to have young people who can find 15 minutes once a day to close their eyes and just be.
Both my kids have little altars in their room, and my son has a sign on his one of them that says, "Take care of your feelings," and then the other one has a sign that says, "Doing nothing is something." Right, so we can we can teach our kids this. We have to do it ourselves. And my favorite form of radical downtime is just the old school. Everybody in the family bed. Let's read.
Oh man!
And then talk. We have the book there, but we do more talking than we do reading at the end of the day. And that's often when our kids, especially as they become teenagers, they start to open up more. But all our kids, it's just radical downtime, preserving those spaces, or having a ritual in your family at the time when you just have downtime. If it's your Sunday dinner or it's your reading time.
And that radical downtime is such a big part of being a non-anxious presence. I mean, that the antidote to stress is deep relaxation. My son, I forget if I shared this story when we talked to you about What Do You Say? I was recording the audiobook for this, and our son was at a camp counselor. I came out of the studio, called my wife up, telling her about the experience, and said, "Oh, by the way, how's Matthew?" She said, "I just had him on the phone. Let me call him back up." And so he'd started having these migraines, what we thought were migraines, kind of a family history for them. And so how much sleep you're getting, ibuprofen, blah, blah, blah. When we're sitting there, he drops a word. That's weird. Few sentences later, drops another word. Few sentences later, total gibberish. I think he's having a stroke. So I'm like, "Vanessa, do me a favor, call me on the line. Don't hang up. We're connected through. Matthew, I'll be right back." Sweetheart, call 911, call the camp counselor, get the director. Obviously, something's not right. I go back to him. Again, he's lost his language because the effects of the tumor is pressing down on language centers of his brain. Fast forward, he's fine now, in case for those who are freaking out about this. He's great now, but when we were about 3 weeks into this adventure, I've been life flighted, had the emergency surgery, came back to DC for chemotherapy and radiation. And my wife and I went out to dinner about 3 weeks into this adventure. And she said, "I've had 3 people ask me, 'How are you so calm about this?'" And she said, "Honestly, I think it's the meditation." And my wife is incredibly capable, bright, executive functions out her ears, but she's not from a family who are really non-anxious. What's the term, Bill? They're neurotic. They're lovely people, but they're neurotic, right? And she said, "I really think that this was, for me, something that allowed me to pull stress out of my nervous system to counteract the stress that's coming into my nervous system." So for all of us as educators, as parents, as young people, if you feel yourself all the time more intense, usually that's just there's more stress in your system than you want. And so one of the ways to move in the direction of being a non-anxious presence is just to have more radical downtime, where to counteract too much stress, have periods of really, really low stress. And it just helps rewire your brain to stay in that middle space more readily.
Well, we have lots of examples of that on this podcast of different ways through nature, through meditation, through human connection, through song, through spirituality, all the, art, creativity. Find your own way and find your own path to parenting, right? Just like you're supporting your child and finding their own path to parenting. And I think that this book, The 7 Principles for Raising a Self-Driven Child, a workbook by William Stixrud and Ed Johnson, is just a really fabulous tool. And I can attest, by having used your work for a number of years now, 7 years, 7
We're
years.
so grateful.
We're honored.
How useful, and even just having these foundational principles in the back pocket. You don't have to know every single step. But just some of these basic principles, how much it will change your experience as a parent. It'll be so much more fun and connecting and all the things that you want.
If you have enough fun, don't read the book.
Yeah.
Sorry, no more fun.
Yeah. Thank you.
If it's true that you can't make somebody do something against their will, just making peace with that is it's scary at first. The scary thing, I really can't make my kid do what I think he needs to do. After that, it's liberating, because you aren't. If you can't do it, theoretically, it couldn't possibly be your responsibility to do it. And just getting your head around that is so liberating.
Yeah, it'll help you as a therapist and as a partner and all of the things as well. Help you at work, help you in lots of places, and with your dog.
That's true too.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Good luck with everything. And thank you for taking this time with us today.
Wonderful to be with you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Wise Effort Podcast. Wise Effort is about you taking your energy and putting it in the places that matter most to you. And when you do so, you'll get to savor the good of your life along the way. If you would like to become a member of the Wise Effort Podcast, go to wiseeffort.com. And if you like this episode and think it would be helpful to somebody, please leave a review over at Podchaser. I would like to thank my team, my partner in all things, including the producer of this podcast, Craig, Ashley Hyatt, the podcast manager, and thank you to Ben Gold at Bell & Branch for our music. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and it's not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatments.